A few months ago, I made a video showing that WoW and FF14 for the last 5 years have been locking heads, going at it neck and neck in order to outdo each other and produce the best content. And as a result, regardless of what you played, the players would win. And I remember speaking to the FF14 team and saying, I know after the mixed reception that Dawntrail has had, you guys are going to come out guns blazing. Well, what about completely ditching gearing? What about completely remaking how everybody plays their job? What about changing how players deal with all boss encounters? What about a refocus onto the sci-fi magic that Final Fantasy XIV is known for? Holy God, make no mistake. The horns have been blown, the battle lines are drawn, and FF14 just shot cannons into what we think MMOs are all about. I want to get into the meat of this stuff, so let's get this out of the way real quick. Fanfests are weird. There are 3 of them. NA goes first, followed by EU, and then finally in Japan shortly before the expansion launches. Then they gradually release more info as each FanFest happens. As such, the very first FanFest, the NA one, is usually the weakest of the 3 as far as like info is concerned. They conceal a lot and they spread it out over the remaining 2 events. Well, not this time, at least as far as we know. Evercold's trailer and world reveal was simply incredible. In comparison to Dawntrail's initial reveal showing rather familiar jungles and port settings, Evercold was far more Final Fantasy. Forge worlds, hive-like megacities, all floating high above an apparently frozen wasteland. I say apparently as they intentionally and jokingly hid the cold from the Evercold launch information. I remember not getting particularly excited about Dawntrail Zones until the Solution 9 reveal in a live letter, which was some months after. This time, it was all superb and wildly varied. The trailer itself seems to have several red herrings, and this is only a third of the final trailer. We won't see the complete version until the Tokyo Fanfest in October. It's already caused endless theorizing and discussion. This is all to say, not only did they hit the mark with this announcement, they shot past it and went way, way further. All right, we're happy. Evercold looks great. That's all good. Let's talk about the dramatic changes to the game. They are shaking the foundations of Final Fantasy XIV, and in my opinion, MMOs in general. This is where we're probably going in the future, and it's looking pretty damn bright. Ever since I joined the game and been fortunate enough to spend time with CBU3, they have always taken the baby step approach to changes. They gently alter things in order to ensure that players aren't hit with major changes that could disrupt or upset them. Well, when it was announced that every single job in the game is going to be reworked and every single player is gonna have to do some relearning, I would say that's a pretty dramatic shift, far more than the eventual dropping of the PS4. The overall goal here takes several different avenues that are all working together to get to this final ending. And that goal, to follow a more ARPG and MOBA style gameplay. And by that I mean, few buttons do many work. Firstly, let's talk about how you press buttons. The evolved combat mode, as they're calling it. It's headed by the newly dubbed Mr. Prime, and it's the initiative to give every job in the game around 16 buttons. And finally address the button bloat that FF14 has. I gotta tell you guys, I was so surprised when I tested the Picto and Viper at the media tour. And I talked to Yoshi P about this off camera. These brand new jobs, these modern day jobs, they still had these weird excess button issues. I know some of you will disagree and say I don't see it, but if I see 3 separate buttons to activate the Pictomancer hammer, and in every instance 2 out of those 3 buttons simply cannot be pressed, that should be 1 button. It's just silly, it's just wasteful. I felt the same way about several specs, essentially just having complete duplicates of their single target spells, but the duplicate version says it does AoE damage. They all work exactly the same and lead to the same finishes. Evolved, it merges nearly all of the filler spells into a single button. Now, we're not talking about a WoW one-button rotation here. That's not what this is. Instead of the filler 1, 2, 3 that is your standard gameplay loop for basic combos, that's just now one button, as it always should have been. So what they're doing then is giving jobs much more focus on the impactful buttons that actually not only make your character do some ludicrously cool animation, but have good weight and good functionality tied to them that you'll want to think about while you're pressing your one combo filler. The phrase they used was freedom of rotation. I like that phrase. I think that's pretty cool. FF14 is going to be breaking the typical MMO combat meta, especially their own disliked 2-minute meta. If you're not sure what this is, nearly every job in the game lines up with 2-minute cooldowns. And what this means is that everybody just builds up to these 2-minute cooldowns and then pesters them all together to do an obscene amount of damage. And then in between those 2 minutes, you just sort of wait and prepare for the next big 2-minute window. Not only do they design bosses to accommodate these burst windows, as players will of course use them, but they cannot then change the damage flavor profile of jobs, because if you don't fit into this 2-minute meta, then you're just worse than someone who does. In MMOs, the more cooldowns you can stack on top of each other, the more damage you do, and so of course you want to put them all into these bosses that are debuffed and your friends are buffing you and all these kinds of things. It creates homogenization, it's a sterile boss creating environment, and so it's gone. They just killed it. They just decided, no, we're not going to do that anymore. From the 4 specs that were previewed in the new evolved system, none of them had some big major cooldown. Instead, they had choice. They would produce charges and resources to use when it fit, when it made sense to what you were doing in the fight. In a world where you no longer just spend 2 minutes preparing for the next big raid burst, you could simply just use them whenever it feels right, and it's not wrong. So, pros and cons of this system. Pro number 1. This should allow them to create lots of different DPS profiles, as it no longer matters to fit them into some arbitrary time window. Some jobs might get very regular sort of short mini burst damage opportunities. Other jobs will take longer to generate their big burst, but when they decide to use it, it should be more impactful than, say, somebody who uses them more regularly. And that will come down to your preference. Pro number 2. It allows them to merge spell effects without it being a detriment. In the Bard demo they did, their song that creates a shield is a DPS cooldown spell. Well, considering they don't need to bank that cooldown for the 2-minute window, they can use it not only defensively to get the shield, but also for its offensive purpose at the same time without a downside. It also reduces the amount of buttons that are on the hotbar. Pro number 3. It allows way more flexibility with bosses. Yoshi P said clearly that when they design a boss these days, every 2 minutes, they have to design an almost like downtime period where the boss just kind of chills for a second, because they know you're all going to be popping your cooldowns, and if that doesn't work, they don't really meet the DPS threshold anymore. It's boring and annoying, and they don't want to do that anymore, so they're not going to do that. Let's talk about the cons. Well, this is a personal one, but popping a major cooldown and going ham and smashing face, especially with your friends, I find pretty fun, at least in my opinion. I do enjoy everyone just going hard, I do. Limit break is cool, obviously, but typically that's like one person using it, and if you aren't a DPS spec, it's rarely going to be you, unless it's all gone wrong or the boss makes you do it. The other con, it could lead to some balance issues, where classes that do certain styles of damage in certain time windows, we talked about somebody having longer windows until they do theirs and some having shorter ones, could be more favored depending on how the new modern era of encounters are designed. This is something that we see all the time in World of Warcraft. Class setups are far more considered based on the damage profile than it is in 14. However, with the upcoming gearing change that we'll talk about soon, this might not even be a con, to be honest. In other words, the pros for me very much outweigh the cons, and this change looks really good. And I was surprised actually to see how positively received this was by many players, despite the fact that there will be a relearning process. Classically, changes to how your class or job works is one of the most negative aspects that people find about the game. But it should be said, the old process isn't going away. While new jobs that are joining after Evercold or during Evercold are going to be evolved only, all the previous jobs that exist right now are going to be able to switch to the legacy reborn mode if they prefer that. It should be pointed out, though, that, again, really boldly, like Yoshi P seemed over the moon, and he was like, yep, using Evolved will, by design, output more than its reborn predecessor. And that if you're doing harder content, you're probably going to find Evolved is superior. In other words, Evolved is the way forward. The old way, you can use it if you want, and they did say that all content will be clearable if you use the old Reborn way, but you really probably should be moving over to Evolved. So for anybody who doesn't want to, all good, and you're probably not going to be affected by the content in any way, so it's all fine. Now, the second avenue to reach this goal is customizable animations. I have begged for this in MMOs for the longest time. I cannot understand for the life of me how World of Warcraft stumbled into something wonderful, and it was called Green Fire. And basically, they made a little mini quest that warlocks in that game could go on to change their fire spells from red to green, and people absolutely loved it, and then they did nothing with it ever again. It's such a free win. It's such a free way of just changing the color of a spell, and people love it. It gives uniqueness. It's good. I don't know. But in that ARPG vein, FF14 is going to be allowing players to modify their attacks into something unique so you can see you did something special. Or you bought it from the store. One of the two things. Very similar to what Path of Exile does, where nearly all of their spells have some sort of skin that can modify it. They showed off the Dragoon's Sky High ability. And bro, I could easily see this being modified with a dragon coming swooping down and crashing onto the enemy if you've defeated some major boss or you've taken part in some sort of seasonal event. You could even have comedic ones. It's such a free win. Not to mention, of course, these will absolutely be appearing in the cash shop at some point. I have no doubt, but it's fun. Now, not everything they announced with this is a clear winner, though, so we should look at this. Not to say it's bad, for sure. In the two examples of the merged spells they showed off, I and many others immediately knew you're probably going to revert this one-button merging of abilities into two, just via a macro. For example, they showed that tanks will now have two spells merged together into one. Their Taunt ability, Provoke, and also their Shirk ability, which gives threat to the co-tank, typically, or to some other player. I'm not going to be manually selecting my co-tank or whatever to shirk them on a regular basis. Certainly if I'm in a static and I'm playing with the usual people, that's not going to happen. I'm just going to macro that because I want to keep DPS in the boss and somebody needs shirking. I'm just going to press a button. I'm not going to click on them, press the button, then click back onto the mob. I'm not going to do that. Some people will. I'm not. So what it means is that yes, they're technically merging the spell into one, which will be great for, I think, you know, more amateur users. I think that's fair to say, or novice users. But generally speaking, this merging is going to be separated back out. And there was a couple of other examples where it did feel that way as well. It's like, oh, we're merging these two spells together. And I was like, I kind of do want them separate, actually. But I get it. I know what you're going for. Healing. This is my main focus in FF14. I recently cleared Savage, current Savage for the first time, and healing is what I love in 14. And I gotta say, these changes I really liked, especially, they showed off White Mage, but I assume it's spreading to the other ones. They're addressing that in Final Fantasy 14, having to actually heal as a healer is considered a bad thing. because it just means you're doing less damage. And it's quite well known that in the FF14, certainly in the higher end content, your healer DPS is one of the most important functions of that role. They do a lot of damage, and you want to get away with as little healing as humanly possible. Now, at least in the case of the White Mage demo they made, but again, no reason they're not applying it to all, standard DPS filler spells are just going to be instant now across the board. So there's no longer a need for your standard stand and cast glare or whatever your DPS spell as a healer, and then having another button which is your instant cast should you have to move, which is essentially the same spell, but this one's instant and does slightly less damage because it's for movement. It'll just be one button now, which is great. And what they said, again, going back to this ARPG model, is that that one button, yes, you're pressing one, similar to the other guys now with their filler spells where their combos are in one. It will do a bunch of different animations and stuff, allowing for more flavor, more creativity with the modded animations that we talked about earlier. So that's really, really cool. But more importantly, as I said earlier, actually healing people is considered like a bummer. You don't want to do that because you're not doing damage. And what they showed with the White Mage is if you actually do have to heal the team, that will then build up a healer nuke. So that you're not DPSing right now because you're casting heals, but don't worry, that's now banking damage that you can then drop onto the target as a payoff for actually having to heal people. This is wonderful, especially for somebody like me. I am far more concerned than the game wants me to be with keeping my team alive. I even get a little stressed out if my raid team is at like 10% HP and they're not getting topped quickly enough, and I'm like, I would really rather have your health bars topped off, right? But you're not supposed to. Now I could turn that into DPS as well. I can heal my team up, I can carry on doing normal damage, and I have a healer nuke on top of it. This is a really wonderful addition to that toolkit. Vice versa, though, the tank change. This was the most vague. It was the only thing, and when anybody announces design changes like this, I try and find the gap in the jigsaw that this piece fits, because then it makes sense. Why are we doing this? I couldn't nail this down, honestly. I thought of a number of different things, but none of them quite fit. The tank jobs are being separated into main tank and off-tank roles. So certain jobs, like Paladin and the new, whatever they're calling it, the double shield bro that's coming during Evercold, are going to be main tanks. Other tanks are going to be moved to the off-tank role. Now, main tanks are getting what they're saying better tools for big single target attacks against them. And then they're being given the ability to do counterattacks like parries for the big damage. So if you put up mitigation for this big attack that the boss is doing, you will get a counterattack. If you time it properly, so you look at it like you would a parry window, you'll get an even better attack to counterattack them with. Kind of cool. Off tanks aren't getting that. What they are getting, though, is tools that lower the damage of attacks done against you and the raid, and big damage reductions for the raid. They're going to be focused on this support role, as Koji put it. But that's kind of all we know. They instantly moved on from this, and I was very, very lost as to what this means. And the good suggestion that I heard, actually, is that saying main tank, off tank is a little... puts a picture in your mind that might not be accurate to what they're doing. And really interestingly enough, my last interview that I did with Yoshida, he brought this up, but of course I had no idea at the time that he was really aware and already in motions for separating these roles out. You can see that here now.
And I think in the example of tank players, we could kind of inform tank players about, since we have the main tank and the sub-tank, when would they be tank switching, and in what sort of situation would the tank switch happen? This sort of information should be provided.
Now, that's sadly all we know. We have to wait until Berlin to find out more. So some ideas I've had on this is either this is going to be like kind of a marginal change up to tanking to reduce individual buttons. But my more exciting idea that I think does have legs if they're going this way is to make tanking more interesting. Typically, tanking, and when you've got two tanks, is one person is tanking, the other person is kind of just DPSing and waiting to taunt. And outside of that, you're not really doing anything other than do the normal mitigation tools that you would affect other people with. However, what if in this new era that we're moving to, tanking was more of a constant, rather than this on-off period, right? Think of it like a light switch. You switch on because you've taunted, you're currently tanking, you're managing mitigation. Other tank taunts, light switch goes off. You have these two sort of modes that you're in. You're either tanking or you're not, right? But what if, going forward, they're now looking to make you engaged with actually being a tank on a far more permanent basis. So there's no longer this on-off period. In fact, both of you are just always on. And what I mean by that is the main tank actually requires the tanking support of the off tank in order to be surviving things. One thing we do know is they're changing tank cooldowns, so you're not just kitchen sinking everything, as people call it, right? Very typical in Final Fantasy XIV. Tanks are either popping an invulnerability and taking some massive amounts of damage that should kill them and staying alive because they're invulnerable, or they're throwing every bit of mitigation they have on top of themselves and stacking it all the way to the sky in order to survive something that should kill them. We don't have that going into Evercold from what we can see. They don't want you having these just layering of cooldowns on top of each other. So what if now what will happen is not only even when you're not tanking, do you have to be aware of what the main tank is tanking, and you actually have to cast things like cover or whatever it might be alongside that tank in order to help them survive. That I could see as a much more interesting gameplay feature if they're going that way. It could also just turn out to be a massively unnecessary idea that's not really going to pan out, but we're going to have to wait and see on that one. So that's Cannonball number 1. Completely reshaping everything to do with playing a character in an MMO, going far more MOBA style, putting tons more action into it, and really instead of focusing on some sort of complex tight rotation, now it looks much faster, and it's going to be much more heavily focused on action set pieces and having several buttons that'll pay off massively while simplifying the filler that goes in between while still making it look cool. Cannonball number 2. Oh boy. Oh boy. This is probably the most dramatic change to the game since A Realm Reborn, and it's one that people always say when they went from Shadowlands over to Shadowbringers is the grass was way greener because FF14 had one character that could be every single job, meaning all currencies and reputations, whatever, were all completely relevant all the time because you were playing the same character. WoW then responded with its warbands. Everything started to be account-wide. They made it far easier to get alts and things like that. And so, FF14 has fired back again. Gear. Gear. One of the most fundamental parts of RPGs and MMOs. If you were if anybody says MMO to you now, with the experience you have, you expect certain things. You expect leveling, you expect dungeons, and you expect some sort of gearing grind. Okay. It's known already that FF's gear is pretty dull, certainly by comparison to WoW. And honestly, people really like that. That's one of the distinctions of the game that people are totally okay with. Like, gear's item level is generally just a block to access certain content. You need, you need to be this tall to ride, essentially is what it is. More importantly for FF14, gear is a way of making your character look cool, and that's far more important than anything else. That's what players really cared about. I mean, just look at all the butt slider requests that came Yoshi P's way during the keynote and his Q&A. So with the aim that FF14 has of adding 2 jobs every expansion, the amount of gear people need to amass to enjoy all this variety of jobs has been a problem for quite a while. So, FF14's just not going to do it.
But now players will be able to reflect their highest item level to others.
Jesus Christ! Jesus Christ! Do you guys even understand how much he just rocked the MMO boat? He shot a cannon at it. What the fuck? Just 14's just not gonna bother. Nah, not doing that. One of the staple elements of this genre is just not gonna be a thing anymore. And players are like, hell yeah, brother. Hell yeah. So in Evercold, whatever the highest item level is that you've acquired, I mean, there's another system to go with this, will just reflect to your job when you change to it, your other jobs. It'll just swap, and it's the same. That's it. You don't need to go, oh, I would really like to try out. I play Black Mage, right? So I'm getting caster gear. I really would like to try and play Viper, which is a physical DPS and melee. And you go, okay, as long as you've leveled it, which is not hard to do, you'll just click Viper and it'll be the same as your Savage geared Black Mage. Done. Let's go. Let's go. As far as I know, you have to get a weapon, but I'm not even sure that's true. It might just be like, no, it's all good. You have a high item level Black Mage weapon. Well, your Viper weapon's also high level as well. Wild. Absolutely wild. To just dispense with one of the core fundamental elements of the genre and just be like, nah, we're not doing that anymore. Oh my god. Okay. The only thing that we know of that Yoshi P mentioned is like, if you were, say, a healer and you needed a tank for your dungeon run, then you could just swap to the tank and you'll have a high item level tank. You'll be good to go, based on whatever your highest item level is, right? However, materia won't swap, which is a whatever burger, honestly. And if you're going to stick around with that new job for a while, all right, you're going to have to swap your materia, or maybe you do want to get a separate item that you gear up with that. But for any other reason, it's really whatever. You'll just be able to swap. Insane. Insane. And they're going, like I said, they're going to, this is like one of the biggest shakeups to MMOs ever. This is crazy. Like, I don't think people really recognize how nuts this is in the MMO world. And perhaps that's because FF14 players already don't really care about the gearing process. So I'm all on board for this, by the way. They're going to supplement this then with their new weekly system.
And while there is certainly something comforting about a product that remains unchanging with time, on the other hand, with a lack of change can come something else. Tomestones. So many. So many. Keep going. More tomestones.
So no longer will the game be tied to the acquisition of stupid currencies like tomestones to farm, which are getting a naming convention that is so astronomically dumb at this point. The tomestones of mathematics and blah, 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 blah to separate them out. Just tomestones, hundreds and hundreds of tomestones per week. Even though it wasn't a difficult process to acquire, they're just getting rid of that as well. Like, done. They're following basically the World of Warcraft trading post system. For those of you who are familiar with that, if you're not, the trading post system is a way of acquiring cosmetics, and essentially you just earn currency to spend in this, essentially a little in-game store on cosmetics. That's it. It involves no real money, and the way you acquire that currency is by doing anything you want, pretty much. It just acquires it because you're playing the game. Well, FF14 is just going to implement that for its entire gearing process going forward. Like, screw that, we're just going this way. Everything the player does will reward points to a weekly cap, allowing you to, like, upgrade your character. So not only does this allow all the previous methods to work, so the way you usually got your tomestones or whatever, that's all going to work. But now, if you did a bunch of other stuff and you weren't interested in spamming roulettes, right, and spamming the daily dungeon, or just doing hunt trains and you don't really like them, you could just do whatever you want now, and it'll fill it up. And on top of that, they're going to make it retroactive, so you can catch up. If you missed a week or whatever, doesn't matter now. The game's going properly seasonal, which it already kind of was. I consider MMOs seasonal in regards to whenever the item level goes up, and they're following that idea, but they're specifically calling it seasons now. And that's the way it's going to be. So gearing in FF14, realistically going forward, should be like nothing short of just doing what you want. And then you can play any job you want, regardless, through this gearing process. This is magical. Magical. Like, if only they could get rid of the leveling process, which is what I personally hate. Coming out of this, man, this is nuts for me. I really don't think people are grasping the actual scale of these changes to the game. And I don't think they'll realize it until they get hands-on. There are more things I want to get hands-on with, particularly the tanking stuff. I desperately want to try out the healer stuff. I can't wait for the evolve system and messing around with all these things, because this feels like not just a fresh coat of paint. This is changing the bottom up. My theory given what we've seen at FanFest 1, and this could change with FanFest 2 and 3, I will be in Berlin to try that out. This feels like the core foundational change to the game in preparation for the dropping of the PS4 and the next proper evolution, which will be PS5 and up. There was a weird moment where typically when Yoshida is delivering something he thinks will be received as bad news, he gets very serious, quite solemn. He wants to make sure this message is getting across is that he understands the severity of what he's saying. And telling people who have been playing on the PS4 since, what, 2013, I think that console came out, that support is ending in 2 years, they gave him plenty of notice, you would think he would treat you that way. He's basically saying, yo, X% of you are playing on PS4 and we're going to discontinue that. Buy a PS5 or GTFO, right? Like, that's kind of the message he's getting across. It wasn't like that. He was giddy. He was giddy, as was Koji. Like, he was, I honestly expected him to get streamers out and like a t-shirt cannon and be like, buy PS4. He was so happy. And you just knew that this has been a weight tied around their ankle for a really long time and preventing them do a ton of stuff because it had to work on the PS4. And these changes are getting ready for the next evolution. Evolution was the word thrown around a lot, and I think that is probably the correct word. It's needed it for a while. In the Q&A, he expressed like how they've managed to get around glamour plates. You would think it'd be super easy, certainly compared to what World of Warcraft does, in which he revealed like the way glamour plates work is you are carrying all that gear with you. When you make a new glamour plate, it's not like just a little bit of code that ticks off a various amount of items, like a tiny, you know, barely a kilobyte of text file that the game could just reference and apply that to your character. No, it's invisible inventory that your character is lugging around with you, that they just keep concealed from you. And it's so hard. They're working with such spaghetti code. Not that the PS4 to PS5 change will do that, but the added hardware, the added power, all those things have very clearly been a problem. And God knows how much stuff has been held back because of that. They're wiping the slate clean. They're going in fresh. And I really do think that although Evercold looks phenomenal so far, and maybe that opinion will change, this is the precursor to whatever the next expansion is, when there will be PS5 and PC up. Something pretty huge coming as well. But I think getting there is going to be awesome. This was an incredible FanFest. And in a week where World of Warcraft is still going with that doom train of releasing content just every 8 weeks, basically a brand new game comes out for World of Warcraft of a questionable quality. In a week where Blizzard had to publicly apologize for the poor quality of their content release. Certainly, if you haven't seen this, really bad. Bug-filled, had to disable major features of the game. Just really bad. Is that FF14 came out and said, we're just changing the game massively. We're doing away with like the gearing idea in MMOs. We don't care. Our game doesn't work that way. So we're doing it this way. We're changing how combat works in our game. We're going this way. We're doing this. We're going to have contextual buttons and we're going to just simplify the whole thing and make it work. And what we're noticing even more than we originally did is just this branch away of how separate these games are. The gulf between them is widening. And we're all winners, man. Me, you, anybody. If you're a WoW fan and would never touch FF14, you're still winning because Blizzard's going to go just as they did 5 years ago. And now you've got warbands and all these different versions of games. That was in response to what they did. And FF14 went, all right, this is what we're going to do. And it's awesome. It's awesome. Love to see your thoughts on this. I will be in Berlin. I'm going to try and get the sit down with Yoshida. Probably not. He doesn't really do interviews at FanFest. But who knows, man? Who knows? Incredible stuff. I'll see you again. Bye.